Jose.
All right, Ron, thank you so very much. Of course, we'll get back to you as soon as there is the announcement to be made. I appreciate your time. Let's bring in Bob Bianchi, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Bob, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so 7 days in, there is some decision by the jury, but it could be, as Ron was saying, any number of different decisions.
Yeah, it could be any number of decisions, but I think this is going to be a pretty clear-cut case as to whether or not it was a murder, and it's going to be the premeditated murder or it's a not guilty. I don't think there's really going to be much room for debate based upon the summations of these attorneys and the evidence in this case.
I want to bring in, Bob, very quickly, a live picture now. Inside the courtroom, you're seeing that there has been a verdict reached in the Aaron Hernandez. There you see him right there. These are live pictures coming into MSNBC right now. They're all waiting, and as Ron Mott was saying, that all of the different family members, etc., have already been coming into the courtroom. So we're expecting any minute now, and this is live, so you're going to see this camera go up and down and turn around at different locations as they try to get the shot in. But Bob, let's talk about that. You're thinking that it's going to be pretty clear-cut, the decision that is going to be announced today.
Yeah, I do, and I think that it's very telling that the jury hasn't asked any significant questions on the facts or to be recharged on the law. As a former homicide prosecutor myself and somebody that does that as a criminal defense attorney now, if I were the defense attorneys, I'd be very concerned right now. I think they took time to go over copious amounts of evidence. They did their job as the jury, and if I had to suspect, this would indicate to me, based on the fact that they haven't had any questions, there doesn't seem to be any concerns, that this is probably going to come back a guilty verdict.
So Bob, talk to me about the 7 days. It took them 7 days to come up with their decision. What does that tell you, if anything?
It tells me that they went over all the evidence. There were over 130 witnesses. There were thousands of pages of documents. There's lots of evidence that they had to go through, and I think they did a fair and deliberate job. In my experience as a prosecutor, when you're doing homicide work, there's a lot of evidence. It's very important. And they did their job and did their due diligence. They took their time and evaluated that evidence.
And Bob, let's talk about what he's facing. And again, Ron Mott was saying possibly first-degree murder and second-degree murder. What's the difference between those two?
Well, one is whether it's premeditated, and if it's premeditated, it's first degree, and if it's not premeditated, it would be in the second degree. The practical difference is it's a life sentence versus one where you could get parole.
Bob Bianchi, thank you so very much. Good to see you. I want to bring back Bob Bianchi, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Rob, right before the verdict, you were telling me that you thought it was probably going to be pretty resounding. You can't be any more resounding than what we've heard this morning.
Yeah, listen, the prosecutor did a tremendous job putting together the circumstantial evidence, and jurors look for common sense. The text messages and the phone calls that were going on about getting down before the crime, hurry up, speeding there, going directly to the scene, a body is dead, obviously a murder has occurred, and then the aftermath. A lot of people critique the prosecutor for this, but the prosecutor did a tremendous job showing, is this the actions of a person who just witnessed a murder and had nothing to do with it? It was very, very, very good that the prosecutor put this circumstantial case together piece by piece, very methodically, and the defense was really hamstrung by the fact that there was DNA on that blunt and other evidence that showed that Aaron Hernandez was there, and they were put in a bad spot. He was there, and they were trying to say he had nothing to do with it, but the evidence completely belied that. This, to me, was a no-brainer of a verdict.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that struck me is how the defense initially had said that their client wasn't there, and then during the trial apparently changed that and said that, well, he was there, but he didn't participate in any way. How does that play into the jury when they're listening to a case and the defense kind of changes its story midway through? Credibility
for an attorney is very important in front of a jury. You never want to say one thing and have the evidence show that it's something different. I think that was a major mistake that they made, and they paid for it in the end, obviously.
Yeah, but on the other hand, when they saw how things were going and how the prosecution's story was being woven, it seemed as though they thought, well, it's pretty clear that he was there. I have to come up with some way of explaining that he didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think they lost a lot of credibility with the jury with that. And then they went in, well, he was there, but he really didn't have anything to do with it. But again, the evidence beforehand and the evidence afterwards, having smoothies, being at the pool, hugging these guys, high-fiving, are not the actions of innocent people.
And Bob, talk to me about the fact that they never were able to find the weapon. I mean, clearly it wasn't that big of a deal as far as the decision of the jury. It took them 7 days, but the fact that there is no weapon to show the jurors, but then there's this image right there. How do you tie that in? And then how were they able to do it so effectively?
Well, they tied it in and they showed both beforehand and afterwards there seemed to be a plan. They were moving around. It looked like there was a weapon. And let's not forget that the girlfriend, fiance, was taking a box out and the weapon was not found in the house. So it was an easy jump, a logical conclusion for the jury to make that clearly there was a weapon that was used. Clearly he was shot by a weapon and the weapon is now gone and a box was being carted out. And now she doesn't know where she dumped it. To me, this was basic common sense for a jury to come to the conclusion.
Bob, stay with me because I want to show right now images of the fiance, Aaron Hernandez's fiance, when the guilty verdicts were being announced. And here's the family.
Is the defendant not guilty? You'll say all members of the jury.
Yes.
You may be seated.
That they are not likely to otherwise contact any juror who makes himself or herself available. There is explicit permission.
Just a very emotional scene on both sides, on the family of Lloyd and on the family of Hernandez, and including his fiancée there. Bob, I want to talk to you about also just the other charges, right? What exactly is that extreme cruelty charge? What does that mean?
Well, the extreme cruelty can be, it's in a manner that is just above that of if I hate to use this term, a typical murder, that it was done in a cruel fashion. They could have very well found that luring him into the vehicle, driving him, he was with 2 other people, he had no ability to defend himself, was done in an especially heinous manner that made it cruel, as opposed to something that may have occurred just in the flash of a moment. Remember, the prosecutor's theme in this case was that this was a plan. He kept hammering that over and over again. These people were laying in wait for him and executed him, essentially, and that's where I think the jury came up with that cruelty finding.
And what does that do for the total time and what he's facing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a huge thing because now he's going to be spending the rest of his life in jail, as opposed to if they found him guilty of the 2nd degree, where he'd been eligible for parole in 15 years. Look, this jury, in my opinion, based on not coming back with any questions during the deliberations, was convinced. They went through the evidence and they were convinced if it was planned, as the prosecution said, it was going to come back cruelty, and they wanted to give him, well, not essentially, but they gave him a life in prison sentence. If they believed the defense and it wasn't planned and he was a poor victim of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, he'd be found not guilty. But if they were going to come back with a guilty finding, it's kind of hard to imagine, especially when you look at them going to a pool the next day, hanging out, having smoothies, high-fiving, one another, burying the evidence in the crime, getting rid of the evidence. It's hard to imagine a jury's not going to come back with the whole lock, stock, and barrel on him if they found he was guilty.